Welcome to Wednesday Wisdom, our weekly devotion following the F260 Bible reading plan. Today we'll be in Exodus chapter 20. So we've seen at this point that God has freed the Hebrews from slavery, freed them out of bondage in Egypt, taken them out, and Moses led them by God's direction. They crossed the Red Sea, and the waters parted, and the Egyptian army was destroyed. And now we find them on Mount Sinai, or at the base of the mountain. And there are certain stipulations here. Okay, no one could touch the mountain without God's permission, or they would die. And we see God's holiness really on display here. This becomes one of the foundational passages for society, for our society, for almost all societies, this Ten Commandments. Well, we read it in Exodus chapter 20, but I really only want us to read the first two verses of this chapter. It's actually pretty interesting. It says this, "And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." You know, prior to giving the Ten Commandments in these first two verses, we see two things. First, God reminds them that He, Yahweh, is their God. He is their God. I am the Lord your God. And second is that it's He who brought them out of slavery. It's really this reminder. It's actually a beautiful reminder if you think about what's happening here of who He is and really all that He's done. And he's showing them, He's like, look at my character. Look at my faithfulness. Look what I've done to you. And He reminds them of that truth before He shows them the Ten Commandments. And the Ten Commandments are not bad, as some people would say. The law is not bad. It reveals to us God's character. While we can't meet it on our own, it doesn't make it bad. Its purpose isn't to save. Its purpose is to guide. And for unbelievers, it shows them that they haven't met God's righteous standard. But for believers, it shows us how to walk. So there's nothing bad in the Ten Commandments. It actually shows us God's moral law. It's a summary. It shows us how to love God. We see that in the first table. And then it shows us how to love our neighbor in the second table. And Jesus reiterates this and telling us to love God and love neighbor. He's pointing to these Ten Commandments. You know, you may say that you love your neighbor, but if you murder your neighbor, you really don't love them. And so that's really where the Ten Commandments help us out. Now, the Ten Commandments, they do remain in effect for believers. Now, no longer as judgment. We're not judged by these Ten Commandments because Christ is our righteousness, but they are a guide. And for Christians, they are a guide. But if you think about it, this statement, this verse 2, in these two characteristics of God, they're true for us as well. Right? It's only if we recognize God's faithfulness, who He is, His worthiness, and His grace, that we're really ever going to seek to obey Him. I mean, it's useless for us to try to love God and love neighbor if we don't understand who He is and we haven't received His grace. But when we do, we have a new disposition towards the law, and we actually want to walk that out. Why follow and obey a false god? Why worship and love an evil God? No, we have a faithful God, one who brought us out of slavery to sin, who's faithful to us. And so we should seek to love Him. We should seek to walk in holiness out of gratitude for what He's done. And I think that's kind of where you end on meditating in that verse. That's what I thought about in my study this week is, Lord, help me to recognize who You are. Help me to recognize all that You've done. When I've sinned, when I transgress Your law, I'm really denying what You've said about Yourself. I'm not realizing all that You've done for me. And so really the response when we sin is not to try harder to follow the law. It's to go back to God, to go back to Christ and realize who He is and all that He's done. Because the reality is when we know Christ, when we experience His grace, when we're close to Him, we actually want to follow God. We want to obey Him because He's good. And He's been good to us, and He knows what's good for us. Well, I hope that you continue in our F260 Bible reading plan. There'll be a link to it in the description. This is week 8 We'll have some in our service. You can grab one up there. I also have a link in the description to Hear Journals, which is a little way to go a little bit deeper into our study. Well, I hope that you have a blessed week. We will see you Sunday, or we'll see you next week for our Wednesday Wisdom Devotion. Thank you, and you have a blessed day.